Charles Kenny, The Plague Cycle, The Unending War Between Humanity and Infectious Disease. Embark on a gripping journey through the Algerian port town of Oran as it grapples with a sinister rat invasion that quickly spirals into a deadly, mysterious plague. In The Plague Cycle, The Unending War Between Humanity and Infectious Disease, by Charles Kenny, witness humanity's struggles and triumphs in their fight against the terror that descends upon their mundane lives. With a focus on themes of human solidarity, resistance against despair, and the conflict between individual desires and communal responsibility, this book summary delves into the complex layers of symbolism and allegory that explore the human condition.
The plague hits Oran. Dr. Bernard Rose, a physician in Oran, a quiet Algerian port town, discovers dead rats lying around his building and begins to worry. Soon after, the town is invaded by a mass of dying rats, and the residents become increasingly alarmed at the gruesome sight. As the situation worsens, the authorities order the collection and incineration of the rats in an attempt to control the outbreak. The town is thrown into chaos as people start falling ill and dying from a mysterious disease while trying to maintain some sense of normalcy and going about their daily lives. Dr. Rose, a dedicated professional, tries his best to treat the sick and contains the outbreak, while a journalist visiting the town tries to report on the living conditions among the Arab population but is prevented from doing so. The story follows the people of Oran as they deal with the physical, mental, and social effects of the epidemic, and the impact it has on their relationships, careers, and overall well-being. The plague strikes. As fever and inflamed lymph nodes start to spread, Dr. Rose and Dr. Castel agree that it can be nothing but the plague. Despite knowing that pestilences have a way of recurring in the world, it is hard for them to believe that it is happening to them. The prefect and most of the doctors are wary of calling it by its name, but Rose grows increasingly impatient with their wait-and-see policy. After small notices go up, asking citizens to follow decent hygiene rules as well as to report the occurrence of fleas and unusual fevers to the authorities, the numbers of daily deaths start to rise exponentially. The anti-plague serum from Paris is late in arriving, the hospital ward is filling up, and an auxiliary hospital is requisitioned at a school. Finally, the prefect receives an order to proclaim a state of emergency and close the town, but it might be too late. The plague's psychological and societal impact on townspeople. The sudden outbreak of the plague separates loved ones and forces townspeople to confront the notion of being in the same boat. The church's week of prayer only evokes fear among people, and life becomes increasingly difficult as the plague worsens. Isolated riots break out, and the merciless summer heat intensifies despair. The prefect has to issue new regulations to combat the disease's spread. Against this backdrop, an ordinary man shares his struggles as he tries to write a novel's first sentence. The Plague paints a vivid picture of how sudden pandemics can yank people from their peace and force them to confront the fact that they are all in the same boat. The novel skillfully explores the psychological and societal impacts of a plague outbreak on a small town's inhabitants, laying bare the fear and despair that gripped their hearts and how they reacted in such a trying time. The Church's approach to combating the disease through a week of prayer, as well as the subsequent sermon by Jesuit Father Panelix, shows how people often react to calamities. The same can be said of the shrewd pub owners who advertise their wine as the best protection against the infection. As the plague worsens, society begins to fall apart, with isolated riots breaking out, and pets being killed as possible carriers of the disease. The prefect exercises his power to issue new guidelines to combat the disease, further tightening the inhabitants' lives. Amidst all this, an ordinary clerk shares his struggles of trying to write a novel, with the opening sentence being his biggest hassle. The Plague is not just a story of coping with a pandemic, it is a story of human resilience, hope, and how people come together during trying times. Fighting together. A group of volunteers, including Rosa's friend Tarrou, come together to help the doctors battling the plague. Castel creates a vaccine, Grand keeps statistical data, and even Father Panelix assists. Meanwhile, Cottard's black market connections aid Rambert's escape plan from the locked town. Despite the challenges, the volunteers fight together and achieve small victories. Rewritten summary. In the face of the deadly plague slowly consuming the town, a group of unlikely heroes band together to help the doctors on the front lines. Rose's friend Tarrou, an outsider with resources, leads the charge by organizing volunteers into sanitary squads to ease the doctor's burden. Castel, a medical researcher, takes on the task of developing a vaccine while Grand keeps track of the growing numbers of infected citizens. Even Father Panelix, a religious figure, heeds the call and contributes. Meanwhile, the cunning Cottard takes advantage of the chaos by utilizing his black market connections to help journalist Rambert escape the locked town. However, things don't go as planned, and Rambert eventually joins Tarrou's relief effort to make a difference. Despite the overwhelming odds and heartbreaking losses, the volunteers persist and achieve small victories. As one character reminds us, on the whole, men are more good than bad. Desperation and sacrifice during a plague outbreak. As the plague spreads to the center of town, authorities declare martial law. Plague victims are dying alone and buried without church services. Coffins run out, and corpses are flung into death pits. The death rate among burial workers is high, but the list of applicants is long as people fear hunger more than the plague. The number of dead exceeds the capacity of the cemetery, and an old crematorium outside the town is utilized. Many public servants and volunteers die of the plague. Meanwhile, Cottard's shady business partners offer Rambert a chance to escape, but he decides to stay with his friends in the plague ward, realizing that leaving now would be cowardly and he wouldn't be able to face his lover. The plague's unbearable toll. In The Plague, Rose administers Castel's new anti-plague serum to a young boy who initially improves, only to die a horrible prolonged death. Rose vents his anger at Father Panelix, who ultimately speaks of the injustice of a child suffering but still asserts the need to trust in God. However, Panelix later dies from the plague. As the epidemic begins to show a decline, the poor suffer from food shortages and a quarantine camp is established in the local stadium. Tarrou's path to peace. Tarrou, while opening up to Rose, shares how witnessing an execution made him abdicate any cause that claimed human lives in pursuit of justice. He advocates for sympathy as a path to attain peace. He and Rose go for a swim in the sea, experiencing rare, refreshing happiness and friendship. Meanwhile, Grand shows plague symptoms, asks Rose to burn his repetitive manuscript, but surprisingly recovers. The town sees the first living rats, and the weekly number of deaths decreases for the first time. Overcoming the plague. Restrictions lift, but the disease still lingers on. Tarrou falls ill, forcing Rose and his mother to bend the rules and care for him. The gates of the city reopen, allowing families to reunite and love to flourish once again. The plague's hold over the city weakens, and restrictions start to loosen. People become more optimistic as the possibility of life returning to normal looms. However, Tarrou falls ill, reminding Rose and his friends of the lingering danger. Rose's wife also passes away, adding to the somber mood. Eventually, the city's gates reopen, and people can finally leave and see loved ones once again. The protagonist, Rambert, struggles with the idea of reconnecting with his past after months of isolation, but the general mood is one of celebration and love. Rose watches the joyous reunions and muses on the meaning of it all, having gained the experience of knowing the plague and the importance of friendship and affection. The triumph over the plague has brought the people to a new appreciation of the little things in life. Battling the dormant plague. The summary focuses on Cottard, who isolated himself in his apartment and shot people from his window. When the police ended his ruckus, Rose learned that the plague bacillus never entirely disappears but can go dormant in furniture and linen chests. Even a city rejoicing after being afflicted by a deadly disease may become complacent in the face of other dangers. Nonetheless, Rose believes that the outbreak demonstrated folks' admirable nature rather than their wickedness. The layers of meaning in Camus' The Plague. The Plague, by Albert Camus, is a novel that follows a classic Greek tragedy structure with 5 acts. In the first, rats emerge, foretelling a sense of doom. A plague breaks out in the town, slowly worsening until its climax in the 4th act. In the 5th and final act, the town reopens, and lovers reunite. The narrator, Dr. Rose, remained anonymous until this point to remain objective. He intersperses his somber narration with quotes from Tarrou's diary, introducing another unbiased perspective. The chronicle of the plague outbreak is the first of many narrative layers and meanings in this novel. Camus wove his philosophical ideas about human existence and the absurd throughout the text, as exemplified by Rose's explanation to Rambert: "We're all involved in the absurd situation, and we've got to accept it as it is." Reading Camus' novel at several levels reveals these hidden meanings. Finding meaning in the midst of chaos. The Plague by Albert Camus tells a story about a deadly epidemic, but it is also an allegory of Nazi-occupied France and a philosophical treatise of the absurd. Camus believed that people are inherently decent and that we must defy the meaningless by creating meaning through action and resistance. The novel reflects 3 aspects of the author's personality: the detached and dutiful healer, the lover who knows passion is fleeting, and the disillusioned idealist. The Plague urges us to always be on watch for another wave of totalitarian ideology and to never justify unethical means for a glorious end. French resistance, fighting against all odds. In the aftermath of France's defeat by Nazi Germany in 1940, General Charles de Gaulle called on his countrymen to resist Nazi Germany and the Vichy regime under Marshal Philippe Pétain. While the majority supported the anti-Semitic regime, some chose to refuse to accept the inevitable, creating an initial focus on supplying allies with vital intelligence and publishing underground newspapers. Armed resistance began in 1941, with young Frenchmen joining in disgust against the much-hated horizontal collaboration between German men and French women. The resistors laid bombs, assassinated enemies, derailed trains, and sabotaged factories. However, for every German killed, about 50 to 100 French hostages were executed in retaliation. The Gestapo captured many activists and turned them into informants. After German troops occupied all of France in November 1942, the resistance eventually united behind de Gaulle. However, fearing an eventual left-wing revolutionary takeover, he kept the communists at arm's length and orchestrated the liberation of Paris in August 1944. After the war, both Gaullists and communists claimed that the majority of French people had been active resistors, although the actual number was far lower. Camus' journey to the plague. Albert Camus' experience during the German occupation of France, his inspiration from a Protestant pastor couple saving Jews, and his call for collective action against the pointlessness of life led to his novel, The Plague. Albert Camus, while working for the daily newspaper Paris Soir, fled to Lyon with his many concurrent girlfriends during the German occupation of France. After marrying pianist and mathematician Francine Faure, he settled in Oran to immerse himself in the history of plagues for his next project, which he preferred to title The Prisoners. Camus later moved to the French mountain village Le Panlier to cure his recurring tuberculosis, and there he was likely inspired by the humanity of the Protestant pastor couple Magda and André Trocmé, who were saving thousands of Jews from the Vichy government. Camus came to realize that his original ideas on the absurd, which postulated tender indifference towards a meaningless life, teaches nothing. Instead, in his letters to a German friend, he called for collective action against the pointlessness of our existence, stating that to resist injustice, help one's community, and alleviate human suffering had meaning. Despite struggling to finish his novel, Camus joined the resistance as chief editor of the clandestine newspaper Combat, in addition to his day job as an editor at Gallimard. His experiences ultimately led to his novel, The Plague, which was published in 1947. Camus' journey illustrates how personal experiences and inspiration can lead to impactful works that have the potential to spark collective action. The timeless relevance of The Plague. Despite initial mixed reviews, The Plague by Albert Camus became a bestseller with over 100,000 copies sold by the end of the year and translated into more than 30 languages. Camus, however, remained unsatisfied, calling its success a lie. The book's metaphorical use of plague received criticism for risking the ahistorical treatment of the Holocaust. Nevertheless, many readers found a reflection of ordinary humanity in good sense in the book. The plague's relevance resurfaced during the COVID-19 pandemic, with the book selling out on Amazon, and readers finding its message more relevant than ever. Reading it during lockdown, people realized that the book's message transcended its setting in Nazi-era France and spoke to universal truths about facing adversity. Ultimately, The Daughter of Camus emphasizes the book's core message of being responsible for our response to the crisis.
Having ventured through the harrowing experiences and philosophical debates presented in Charles Kenny's The Plague Cycle, readers are left with poignant insights on how humanity confronts and perseveres through disease, disaster, and uncertainty. The unyielding spirit of resistance against despair and the extraordinary acts of kindness and unity emerge in the face of an insidious plague. Ultimately, humanity's ability to endure and transcend the afflictions of this world, be it infectious disease or existential despair, helps illuminate our capacity for hope, resilience, and solidarity even amidst the most unfathomable of circumstances.